The second truck contained the women SS guards, accused equally with the men of appalling crimes of cruelty and mass murder. One of the most prominent among the women prisoners is Irma Grese, number 9.
Known as the Blonde Bee of Belsen and the Beast of Belsen, Irma Grese may have been the worst female Nazi SS guard. During her trial at the end of the war, former victims recounted Irma's horrifying punishments, including beatings, mutilations, and psychological torment, all of which they said she took sadistic pleasure in. Alongside the names of disturbed Nazi criminals like Josef Mengele, the young and beautiful Irma Grese will undoubtedly go down in history as a monster. While she was only one of thousands of women who served in Hitler's concentration camps during World War II, the savagery of her deeds makes her a unique case. It's time now to take a look at Irma Grese and the trail of terror and violence that she left behind her. Irma's devotion to Nazism began when she was just a child. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, Irma was 10 years old, meaning she grew up surrounded by Nazi ideology. As the daughter of a dairy worker, Irma fit perfectly into Hitler's view of what the model German citizen should be. She was a beautiful girl with blonde hair and blue eyes and lived in the rural countryside. Thus, she embodied the Nazi physical ideal and the spiritual ideal of being connected to the land, Blut und Boden, blood and soil. But Irma's childhood was far from ideal. When just 12 years old, she witnessed her mother commit suicide by swallowing a bottle of hydrochloric acid. When Irma and the rest of her family found her, they rushed her to the hospital. But it was too late. The doctors could do nothing to save her. Some say that the trauma of her mother's death may have contributed to Irma's later sadism. At the very least, it probably pushed her even more firmly into the Nazi Party. Irma soon joined the Nazi League of German Maidens, against her father's wishes. The Nazi League was just one of several organizations that formed the Hitler Youth Movement. These organizations aimed to recruit the next generation of Nazi citizens, indoctrinating them in how to serve the needs of the German nation. Irma took these ideas to heart while finding comfort in being part of something bigger than herself. At 14, Irma dropped out of school and began working as a nurse assistant. In her later testimony, she admitted that she wanted to continue as a nurse. But after 2 years, she was reassigned to Ravensbrück against her wishes. It was there, in Nazi Germany's largest female concentration camp, that Irma would turn from healer to sadist. During her 7 months at Ravensbrück, she oversaw a block of 20 women. She learned for the first time what it was like to wield power and used it gleefully. Knowing the women couldn't fight back against her, she beat them with impunity, calling it their training. Ravensbrück gave her her first taste of violence, and she was hooked. But Ravensbrück was just the beginning. In March 1943, she was transferred to Auschwitz, where she quickly rose through the ranks, going from telephone operator to camp guard in just a short time. At Auschwitz, cruelty was built into the culture. The SS commandant, Rudolf Höss, made it clear to Irma that compassion would not be tolerated. When another female guard showed kindness to some prisoners, she was given 25 lashes on her buttocks. Höss made Irma deal the final 2 blows herself. Irma would saunter through the camp in her knee-high boots as a guard, wielding a whip covered in cellophane to make the blood wash off easier. Still only 20 years old and weighing no more than 100 pounds, Irma seemed contradictory. Prisoners came to fear her while struggling to reconcile the attractive young girl they saw with her sadistic acts of violence. As one former prisoner at Auschwitz recounted, "She did such terrible things, especially with our block. Her face, was so beautiful. Beautifully dressed in such a trim SS costume and a stick in her hand and a large dog." When Irma Grese would talk to the block senior, she would ask how many people there were, how many had died, and so on, and show such a beautiful countenance, such a kind face. Nobody could tell that just a moment ago she had such scenes and was so bad that she could be so ruthless to other people. Indeed, as witness after witness would later testify, behind Irma's kind face was a person whose cruelty seemed to have no limits. She beat prisoners with her whip, her fists, and her pistol. She set her dogs on women who were already weak from malnutrition and overwork. One survivor of Irma at 2 camps recalled her beating women and girls with a stick. Her favorite habit was to beat them until they fell to the ground and then kick them as hard as she could with her heavy boots. But Irma's violence went beyond beatings. On one occasion, 2 sisters who had just been chosen for the gas chambers tried to escape out an open window. Once they had fallen and were lying on the ground, Irma walked over and shot them both. As the head of a work party that collected stone and sand from a quarry, Irma often played cruel tricks that resulted in numerous deaths. Near the work, the site was a wire fence 3 or 4 feet high, watched over by an armed guard. Every day, Irma would order a group of prisoners to cross the fence and get something for her, but she always gave the order to non-Germans. Inevitably, as the hapless women crossed the fence, the guard ordered them to stop, but unable to understand, they would continue and be shot. Irma Grese's cruelty was perhaps only matched by one man, Josef Mengele. Known as the Angel of Death, Mengele was a Nazi doctor famous for his twisted experiments on inmates at Auschwitz. Every time a train full of prisoners arrived, he would walk back and forth along the platform whistling, deciding whether the thousands of new arrivals would be made into slaves or sent directly to the gas chambers. The unlucky ones were chosen for his experiments. He was particularly interested in twins, even better if they were children. During his experiments, he subjected his victims to all sorts of inhuman treatment, including castration, sterilization, and the removal of organs and limbs. According to some survivors, Irma Grese was Mengele's lover. Because of him, she was said to have developed an insatiable sexual appetite. Beyond her affairs with other SS guards, she also forced inmates into submitting to her sexual demands. Once, when a handsome male inmate repeatedly turned down Irma's advances, she took revenge particularly viciously. First, she made him watch as she beat his lover. When she was done, she then had the man shot and sent the battered woman to the camp brothels, and her sexual violence extended to both sexes. She was said to have had numerous affairs with female inmates, and that she was particularly jealous of attractive women. While accompanying Mengele during the selection process, she would choose the most beautiful women and girls to go directly to the gas chambers. But she had one particularly sickening habit. She would go around camp looking for the most beautiful inmates and deliberately whip their breasts until they bled. She had a specific reason for doing this. The breast wounds would inevitably become infected, and the women would then have to have them cut open by a doctor. Irma took special pleasure in watching these painful operations. According to one witness, Irma Grese invariably arrived to watch the operation, kicking the victim if her screams interfered with her pleasure, and giving herself completely to the orgiastic spasms which shook her entire body and made saliva run down from the corner of her mouth. From Auschwitz, Irma was transferred to Bergen-Belsen during the war's final days. It's clear that Irma's behavior continued here because despite only spending 1 month at the camp, this was where she earned her nickname. As the war came to an end, and other guards either fled or began to hide their past deeds, Irma took no such precautions. She continued her cruel behavior right up until the camp was liberated on April 15, 1945. She was then rounded up with 44 other Nazi SS personnel and put on trial. During the so-called Belsen Trials trial, former inmates came forward and recounted the terrors they had endured at the hands of Irma. Meanwhile, newspapers sensationalized the proceedings, focusing on Irma's physical beauty. They could not resist commenting on the 21-year-old blonde with undeniable good looks. Despite the heinousness of her acts, Irma felt victimized during the entire trial and tried to pass off the blame to Heinrich Himmler, who had been chief of the SS. She alternated between calm composure and violent outbursts in which she denied wrongdoing. At one point, her emotions got better, and she began screaming that she had never shot a prisoner. There were other times, however, when she couldn't help giggling while the witnesses testified. In the end, she was sentenced to death, along with 10 others. The night before her execution, she sang in her cell. The next day, 22-year-old Irma Grese became the youngest person executed in the 20th century under British law. She never once apologized for any of her actions,